Coming up, we preview May 5th's National Day of Awareness for Missing and Murdered Indigenous Relatives by speaking to a longtime advocate and an athlete running for a cause. Plus, Chaco Canyon is a sacred place to Southwest tribes. We hear about a new bill aiming to protect it. I'm Aaliyah Chavez. Join us for those interviews plus headlines from the ICT Newscast.
This program is made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, a private corporation funded by the American people.
Arizona State University welcomes 3,500 Indigenous students from Arizona and across the nation. It serves one of the largest populations of Indigenous students among U.S. colleges and universities. We created a sense of place for tribal nations to create futures of their own making through community outreach and research, taught by world-class Indigenous faculty where they see a reflection of themselves and their experiences. Find community at ASU.
Amirawa Hopa, thank you for joining us. In 2017, the U.S. Senate named May 5th as a day to raise awareness for missing and murdered Indigenous relatives. Since then, we've seen some government and law enforcement moves to counter the crisis. As May 5th rolls around again, we take a look at how far we've come and how far we have left to go. Here's ICT's Stuart Huntington.
It's a multifaceted problem that we need to address. And it's a big job.
Juliette Rudy is the director of the Minnesota Missing and Murdered Indigenous Relatives Office. Launched in 2021, it was the first such office in the country.
I have a cousin that's been missing since 2017, and so I see and I hear the stories that come from Indigenous communities. These are families that have been impacted and haven't been heard. So I feel like I have a responsibility to be that voice.
Rudy's office is growing. She hired 3 new staffers this year, and today a growing handful of other states have launched MMIR responses. On the federal level, the Justice and Interior Departments each have initiatives underway. Advocates cheer the progress.
I think we've come a long way. I think we've certainly raised awareness. We are seeing, for instance, like I said, we're seeing more task forces. We have MMIP coordinators in U.S. attorneys' offices. We have offices like this. So we are seeing more response to this issue, more attention to this issue.
But the mountain remains high.
In Minnesota, we represent 1% of the population, but between 8 and 9% of the homicides are Native women. I think we are getting more response, but I don't believe that the increased attention to this issue is leading to a decrease in numbers.
Yet.
Change doesn't come quick. Change takes time, but we have to start somewhere.
In St. Paul, Minnesota, Stuart Huntington, ICT News.
Now to Washington, D.C., where lawmakers have gotten some feedback on a bill affecting who can sell Native arts and crafts. Last week, the U.S. Senate Committee on Indian Affairs held a virtual listening session for potential updates to the amendments to Respect Traditional Indigenous Skill and Talent Act. This is also known as the Artist Act. In 1935, a federal law called the Indian Arts and Crafts Act was created to protect Native artists. The advertising law makes it illegal to sell any arts or crafts that falsely suggests it was created by Native Americans, and it penalizes those who sell inauthentic products. Congress has only amended the law 3 times since it was first enacted, with the last update being in 2010. At this session, some Native leaders said they were concerned with non-Natives capitalizing off of Indigenous art and culture. There was also concern about how to define who can and can't sell their art under this act. While some believe state-recognized and former federally recognized tribes should also be protected under the Artist Act, others felt differently. That includes Principal Chief of the Cherokee Nation, Chuck Hoskin, Jr.
I want to be plain, I want to be clear. State-recognized tribes are not Indian tribes, and a member of one of these organizations are not Indian tribes, are not citizens of Indian nations. So the most important change that Congress can make and should make in the next iteration of the Indian Arts and Crafts Act is to narrow the definition of Indian and Indian tribes so that it ensures that works are only covered if they are produced by members of federally recognized tribes.
The committee is still accepting written comments on the legislation. They can be submitted to artist@indian.senate.gov until May 19th. The Gathering of Nations powwow continues the tradition of honoring the Horse Nation with the Horse and Rider Regalia Parade. Rosalind Yazzie has this story from Albuquerque, New Mexico.
Thousands of visitors flock to Albuquerque, New Mexico to dance at the Gathering of Nations powwow. But there's another event that brings in excitement. The popular Horse and Rider Regalia Parade honors the Horse Nation by showcasing the unique culture of North American tribes through horsemanship and dress. 28 riders competed this year before a panel of specialized judges who choose the winners. This all began as an idea from Gathering of Nations founder Derek Matthews and Shoshone-Bannock citizen Roseanne Abrahamson, who was an experienced horse parade rider in her youth. She said they start the event by calling the horses through song.
My tribe, the Shoshone-Bannocks, are a horse nation tribe. They started the relays. They were a horse people for, I guess you could say they were warriors of the plains because of the horses. And the horses, long ago, they understood our language and they understood our songs. And so we would call it the horse calling.
Noella Red Hawk's family parade their leopard Appaloosas throughout the country. They all register back to Iron Gyro of Livingston, Montana, and are Chief Joseph bloodline horses. All of the regalia on their horses are earned by their riders. The designs and beadwork are specific to the rider. Two-time horse and rider champion and best of show, former Miss Indian World, Tashina Red Hawk's regalia belongs to her great-great-great-grandmother. It took 3 years to beat her horse's regalia to match hers.
So what got us involved with the Gathering of Nations Horse Parade is that we knew that we finally had a platform that we can come and showcase what our family has been building for the last 15 years. And this is the place, this is the world stage.
Raquel Sam and her horse Lakota Spirit were awarded this year's Best of Show. They were honored with the Horsetail Dance. In Albuquerque, New Mexico, Rosalind Yazzie, ICT News.
Those are the headlines for the ICT Newscast. Two members of the U.S. Congress representing New Mexico introduced legislation on Wednesday to prevent further development of the sacred site Chaco Canyon. The effort is the latest in a years-long fight to protect one of America's 24 UNESCO World Heritage Sites from future mineral development. Leading the effort is the Pueblo Council of Governors. Joining us now virtually is its chairman, Mark Mitchel, who is a former governor of Tesuque, Pueblo. Hello to you, Chairman.
Good morning.
First off, describe Chaco Canyon and its significance to several native tribes and nations in the Southwest.
Chaco Canyon is sitting northwest of Santa Fe, but kind of northeast of Albuquerque, and it has it's a traditional cultural place of all the tribes, especially the Pueblos, who are constantly making sure that the landscape is protected and the ancestral Pueblonian footprint is protected in perpetuity.
Is Chaco Canyon already being developed, and what are the ways that that development could get worse?
Yes, well, about 90 to 95% of the surrounding landscape is developed by way of gas and oil wells, new roads, etc. And so we've been working diligently with the Navajo Nation since probably 2015. And in 2017, we've all come together to have the same discussion of how do we protect the area in perpetuity. So, yes, the entire area is about 90 to 95% developed by way of oil and gas.
Secretary Deb Haaland advocated for the protection of Chaco while she was a member of Congress. Are you seeing that same support now that she's leading the Interior Department?
Yes, we are. We are hoping that she continues supporting all the tribes, but in this arena and in this issue, we're hoping that she does help the tribes. I know she's in a difficult position, but I think that for us as Pueblos and Native people, the entire world is sacred. So the protection of the entire world is ultimate. But regarding that, we look toward our champions at every level, whether they're at the state level or at the federal level, to make sure that these areas and the landscapes are protected. And the reason why we're doing that is more so for our unborn, so they know what's out there on the landscape.
The legislation that was introduced in the U.S. Congress yesterday is specifically asking for a 10-mile buffer around the National Historical Park. What is the thinking for adding that 10-mile perimeter?
I'm going to have to teach you history. I started with this way back in probably the 90s or early 90s. And since then, we were working with then Senator Udall. His proposal back then was a 25-mile buffer. And then it came down to 15, then it came to 10. The reason behind that is because it's just not the Chaco Canyon and the structure, but the landscape surrounding it. So for Pueblo people, and I can only speak for my tribe because I'm pretty sure the rest of the Pueblos do practice their religion, but it takes us off our current reservations and for pilgrimages and doing what we need to do to visiting these sites, and it's along that path for those discussions that the landscape is also, there's also sites in there, there's also areas of pilgrimages. Most importantly, we're concerned about those that have come before us, our ancestors. And I know that in years past, you know, wherever they fell and passed on, pretty much that's where they were laid to rest. So you get burial sites all through the landscape, and that's one of the things that we wanted to also protect, in making sure that the Chaco is protected, but the outliers are also protected, and the North Road is protected, and other areas of cultural importance are protected within the landscape. And that's why the 10-mile buffer is what we were looking at.
Chairman, this morning, Thursday morning, the White House officially proclaimed May 5th, 2023 as National Day of Awareness for Missing and Murdered Indigenous Relatives. Very quickly here, how much of a priority is it to you and to the Pueblo governors to address this topic?
I think all the issues are at the very top of our list, but yes, missing and murdered, that's critically important to all of us, because there are our people, there are our loved ones, and we want to make sure that, you know, we help our families, and making sure that those individuals are, one, hopefully found, or their cases come to rest, what have you. And it takes a lot of us. It takes not only the Pueblos, all the natives, but it also takes the non-natives as the state or the feds need to also come together, so we can collectively work together to make sure that these types, the missing and murder, are, one, found, two, that their cases have come to rest, and, you know, making sure that we take care of our people spiritually, mentally, and physically.
Well, All Pueblo Council of Governors Chairman Mark Mitchell, thank you for your time.
You're welcome.
Data Data from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention shows that the third leading cause of death for Indigenous women is homicide. That's coupled with existing data from the U.S. Department of Justice, citing that Indigenous women are more likely to experience violence than any other group. This data is the backdrop behind organizers across the country who are gearing up for Friday, May 5th's National Day of Awareness for Missing and Murdered Indigenous People. Angel Charley is one of those working on the ground on this important issue. She is the executive director for the Coalition to Stop Violence Against Native Women, and she also sits on the White House's Gender Policy Trilateral Work Group to address this issue. Welcome to the ICT Newscast, Angel.
Hi, thank you for having me.
We heard in that introduction that there is limited but very glaring data on the violence that Native women face. Start us off with sharing what the issues are with getting these kinds of numbers.
Sure. So the overview about data collection is there's several places, right, that Indigenous folks are turned to when it comes to addressing this issue. So we're working in multiple jurisdictions, federal, state, tribal. And so a lot of the efforts that have come forth around MMIW is getting these bigger systems to collaborate and communicate within themselves so that we can have one picture of data. Because right now, it's just, there's not a clear picture. But what we do know is that we're overrepresented in the data when it comes to our folks going missing or murdered.
I know that this issue hits close to home for just about everyone in Indian country, and it's really sad that a lot of us have examples of relatives who have gone missing or, been murdered. I want to make sure that we're providing some resources for families who are maybe going through this. In your opinion, what kinds of resources are out there, and how much further should those resources go?
Sure. So one of the biggest issues to highlight is there's chronic underfunding when it comes to any of our tribes addressing this issue on a community level. But there are organizations who are on the ground level doing the work. So I think about Strong Hearts Native Helpline. I think about the National Indigenous Women's Resource Center. I think about sovereign bodies. But I also think about the services that exist within our own communities. So our social services, our behavioral health, the safety nets that we have that exist within our own communities. How can we lean on them should any of us find ourselves in that situation?
Angel, what is one thing you wished public and elected officials understood about this crisis?
Sure. I think with the increase of awareness that we've seen, we recognize that the issue of MMIW has been brought to light, but not the actual stories of the families themselves. And so when we look at the federal response, when we look at the state responses that have come to this point, they still leave the families out. And what we're advocating for at the Coalition to Stop Violence Against Native Women is to support those families, to resource the families. A lot of them are still searching on their own, holding rallies on their own, out of their own pockets. And so though we have DOI or DOJ addressing these issues, that's really around the data collection. It's really around the way that the entities like BIA or tribal or municipal police communicate with one another, but the families are still being left behind. And so a lot of our advocacy efforts with the coalition have been to center the families, get them the resources, offer the platforms so that they can share their stories.
Can you talk about the ways that you've seen this movement grow over the past couple of years?
Sure. So it's important to remember that the MMIW movement, it began addressing land violence, right? So there was a high rate of violences against Native women around extractive industry sites, man camps, if you will. And so I think with all of the traction that's happened over the years, that's a piece that kind of gets left out and left behind. But at the coalition, we advocate that land violence is body violence. And so remembering that's where it was rooted and that's where it started. And as we've seen advocates, family members share their stories, that the movement has grown, it's moved away from that. And so I think that that's what I would like to remind folks, that if we're thinking about the journey of the movement, it's important to remember where it started.
Well, Angel, Charley, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Our next guest says she hated running as a child growing up on the Navajo Nation in New Mexico. But in 2009, in hopes of getting fit and committing to her health, she started training for her first half marathon. 14 years and thousands of miles later, she now has a passion for running and uses it to raise awareness about important causes like missing and murdered Indigenous relatives. Joining us now is the founder of Native Women Running, Verna Volker. Hi there, Verna.
Hi, thanks for having me.
How have you been able to use Native Women Running as a platform to bring awareness to missing and murdered Indigenous relatives?
Oh, that's a good question. There's so many women that follow our account who are from different nations and tribes. And 4 years ago, we created a virtual run to bring honor and awareness of missing and murdered Indigenous relatives. And our first year, it was pretty amazing how many people wanted to be a part of this movement. At the time, I was just a mother with 3 young kids, and I couldn't be at the forefront of this work. And I wanted everyone to be part of it. And so it's our 4th year, and I feel like the women who are part of Native Women Running have shared their stories of people that they have lost and who are missing. And I think that resonated across the board with Native Women Running. And so a lot of them do personally share their stories with me. And so we make sure that we are always careful how we do this. I don't really feel like Native Women Running is a big advocate, but we support all those who are actually doing the grounds work. And so many of our women run for this cause, and we're really grateful that they're able to do that.
Speaking about personal stories, what are some safety concerns that you've heard from female Native runners when they're, out wanting to go on a jog or a run?
Oh, so many. Just recently, I had a woman who shared her story. She was training for a 50K, and she had someone just come after her, like in a vehicle. And thankfully, she said she called her husband. So a lot of that is just being in cities where they're alone or being in very rural areas. And so I do my best throughout the year as a founder to give safety tools to our women. And we have a partnership with a running company that makes safety running tools for our women to wear. And so I think just sharing that, and it's scary because I think in the back of the mind of all our minds is like, we don't want to put ourselves in these positions, or so we're always careful how we approach this. And so we are grateful for those partnerships.
Let's actually talk a little bit about those safety tools for someone who's listening to this interview and, is maybe wondering how they can make sure, that they're returning to their destination after their run. What would you say to them?
For sure. One of the things I always tell them is like there's a lot of running apps that you can use that will track where you're going, especially your phone, making sure that you have it on where you can find your location. I always talk about how, wear your headphones if you want to, but make sure it's on low volume. Always be aware of your surroundings. Tell your spouse or your friend or your family members where you're at, what you're wearing, and what time you're going to come home. And also, even I always stress, if you have a buddy, run with a friend early in the morning or late at night. And oftentimes I hear a lot of the women say that their husbands will follow them when they run. So those are some of the things that we stress. And we also have this partnership where it's a tool where you wear a ring and it's serrated. And yeah, just all those kind of tips that people have shared on our social media has been really helpful to a lot of people. And some of the things I never thought about, but it's been really good advice for all of us to take precaution in these areas.
Some of the ways that I've seen the MMIR movement increase in the past couple of years is with prayer runs or, walks to kind of honor victims. What kinds of ways are you seeing this year in particular people paying, their respects to this movement?
So many ways. We talk about Native women running, and a lot of us are competitive, but across the board, I've seen our women talk about how they are running for healing. They're running in prayer. They're running for their loved ones. And so a lot of them, I think, individually take their own stories and use that to run in these ways. And particularly this year, we're supporting Darlene Gomez out in New Mexico, who is a pro bono lawyer for 18 MMIR families. And I think that motivates a lot of people to participate, knowing that we are actually raising money for someone who is working with these families, and that we know that the money will get to them. And so I think those are ways that, as a whole, as Native people, we have dealt with so many trauma in our lives, that we have our own trauma, that this run is just to come together, to heal, to pray in whatever way, especially a day that really hits hard for a lot of families.
Well, teacher, mother, advocate, and founder of Native Women Running, Verna Volker, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And that's a slice of our Indigenous world. For all the latest, visit ictnews.org. From all of us in the newsroom, stay safe, my relatives.
This program is made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, a private corporation funded by the American people.